What is a veteran, if someone should ask? A person who serves now or deep through the past. 2 world wars, Korea, Vietnam, Cold War veterans, and those in the Gulf, Iraq and Afghanistan, and those who served here on post ports and bases, or now very near.
Hello, this is Merrimac Stories. I'm Laura Mailman, and today we have veterans from the World War II, Cold War, and the Vietnam War, and we're also privileged to have the daughter of a soldier that was killed. And I'm going to start this off by letting them all introduce themselves.
I'm Leo Jubert, a U.S. Army veteran. I served in Germany, in Ludwigsburg, Germany, with the Medical Corps.
Rick Olson, I served in Vietnam. I'm a Merrimac citizen now.
Richard Dam, I served, had my boot training in San Diego, and I served in Guam for 16 months, and Navy, of course, Naval Operating Base on Guam, and we ran the waterworks up in the boondocks for 6 months, and the Japanese were in hiding there somewhere. They didn't know, we didn't even know they were there. But then we had POWs there who were working for us until we sent them back to Japan.
Hi, I'm Jerry Conway Morensky. I'm the daughter of Corporal David Leonard Conway, who was killed in action on April 14th, 1945 in Wiesenfels, Germany, and I was known as a war orphan or a Gold Star child.
Hi, Roger Clark, served during Vietnam, United States Marine Corps for 4.5 years. I ended up my tour on the drill field in San Diego as a drill instructor, and when I got out I joined the Army Reserves. Spent 2 years in the Army Reserves, and then joined the National Guard Reserves only because they closed the Army Reserve Center, National Guard Reserves in Newburyport. And my history goes back to Merrimac resident all my life, born and brought up in Merrimac Port, born in the old Amesbury Hospital, and we weren't allowed to come up to Merrimac uptown, we called it, during our childhood, so we had a little school down in Merrimac Port that we attended.
And I'm Robert Clark, Roger's brother, and the same bringing up that he had. And as always, I wanted to see as much of the world as I thought I could see, not knowing that it was going to be an expensive venture to see the world. So after talking to a few people, I decided the best way to see it was through the United States Navy. And I also found out that the Navy has quite an educational program, so I joined the Navy, went into radio, spent 6 months in radio class, and then talked to different people on now where do I go from here. And they said, well, you want to see the world, the best place is aboard a ship. And the best ships are the smaller ones. So I found a naval destroyer, the USS Henley, which was DD 762, and we were all over Europe. And I must say, to be in places like Greece, France, Rome, to even actual climb on the Eiffel Tower, not the Eiffel Tower, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, before they straightened it up, to be able to look at it and see it leaning to one side and think, I'm going to be able to get up on the top of that. And then today, to listen to the news today, to say, I was there, I was standing right there where that news person is standing. So one thing I will say, the military did me good and justice, and I am now a citizen of Kingston, New Hampshire.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. One of the questions that is uppermost in my mind whenever we start to look at November, and that is what does it mean to be a veteran, and what does Veterans Day mean to you individually? I was raised in a very patriotic household. My father was in the Coast Guard Reserves, and every other Wednesday night he went off to serve, and every summer he spent his summer vacation aboard ship or doing something of that nature. So it's very special to me to remember and thank those of you who have served in the military, but I'd like to hear it from you what it means.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I didn't think too much one way or the other about my service. I did what I was told to do, and that was it. What it means to me personally is there are 3 people in my life that I knew, 2 relatives and 1 a good friend. Jack McCarran, a good friend of mine who was wounded in World War II on Okinawa. A cousin from Amesbury, Wallace Hobbs, he was wounded crossing the Rhine River during World War II. And my wife's brother, whom I never knew at the age of 18, was killed in the harbor of Barry during a German air raid.
For those who may remember, Jack was the president of the Merrimac Savings Bank.
Right. And Wallace Hobbs, if anybody is familiar with Lake Gardner, the dam that's right there at the bottom of the dam is a bridge, and that's known as Wally's Bridge. It was named after him because he was very much involved in veterans projects after the World War II. My wife's brother, nobody knew too much about why he died, how he got killed, but 50 years later the Freedom of Information Act kicked in, and his ship that he was an armed guard on was loaded with 100 ton of mustard gas bombs, which was against world regulations at the time, but still we did things to win the war. That whole story impacted me very much.
And he was in Italy, I believe.
Barry, Italy, in the harbor at Barry, Italy. He was on board a Liberty ship, a cargo ship, known as the USS John Harvey. The ship never sustained a direct hit. It was set on blaze by surrounding ships, and the ship literally just disappeared. I talked to a gentleman who was an armed guard on board another Liberty ship inside that same harbor, and he said no one on board suffered. He said it just happened so quick. Those are things that Veterans Day sticks out to me.
Yes, I can understand why. Rick?
I had a lot of people in my family who were in all the different branches of the service. My father was in the Navy, and my foster brother was in the Air Force, so I didn't think too much about it either. It was just something that I thought I should do. It was a tradition, and I felt it was a worthwhile thing to do, and I think it helped me grow up. I got to see the world too, but I noticed that the places I went, they seemed to be shooting at me, which was something I hadn't necessarily counted on. But I think it had to do with the training. You did your job, and I was in Army Intelligence and Civil Operations, so we went out into the villages in Vietnam, and we went with medical teams and dental teams, and we gathered information on troop movements and things. I was in the Delta area, which was, relatively speaking, pacified. Now I say relatively speaking, that means they only shot at me 7 or 8 times and almost missed. But usually, it wasn't like some of the massive ground operations that took place in the north. But it was, I met some wonderful people there. I alas, don't know what happened to them when we left, but I thought, when the years pass, you look back on things in a different light. Some of the things that we did sort of unquestioningly as part of our job, you look back on it now and say, was it worthwhile? Was it right? Was it wrong? I don't know. I still don't. Your ideas on it change over the years, but I think it was a duty. I'm proud of my service. I think I did a good job. I hope I did, and I thank all the guys. I met some wonderful people, some of whom didn't make it, unfortunately, and some did, and some made it damaged, to say the least, and that's something that we have to live with. I think of that today when I see so many guys coming back from the Middle East with terrible injuries and mental injuries too. And that's important. You have to remember, it isn't like John Wayne movies, you know, it's real.
Or Rambo.
Or Rambo, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Richard.
it means a lot to me in a way. Well, I love my country a lot and family. My dad fought in the first war. He fought over in France, and he was wounded, and he got a taste of mustard gas. And I used to comment, I'm sure glad he made it through. In 5 boys, none of us would be here. He met Mom. It's funny, he fought the Germans, and Mom was, folks were born in Germany, and so he married one. And but anyways, Dad fought. He fought a good fight. He was loved this country, and we all do. Now after him, we got 4 brothers, 5 of us boys, and all of us were in the service. My 2 older brothers were in the service, and they were great guys, and they were during the Second War. I was fortunate. I went in a couple months after the war ended. So I wanted to serve my country, and I joined the Navy, and then I could join for 2 years. I was the last of the 2-year men to join, because my 2 younger brothers joined after I did, and they had to sign up for 3 or 4 years. And my 2 older brothers, my oldest brother was in the Air Force. He worked in Boston, and he joined the Army Air Force then. And so I really looked up to him. He made model airplanes all his life, and he was anxious to go in the service and get in the Air Force. And then my second oldest brother joined the Marines, and he was out in San Diego, and he had orders to go overseas. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. But while he was there, we were born in Buffalo, New York, all of us boys. While we were there, he was a scrapper somewhat, and they knew he was a scrapper, so they voted him into fighting in the Golden Gloves in San Diego. And he fought his first fight. He was a good fighter, but the guy he fought was like a pro, and Chuck wouldn't go down. Brother Chuck wouldn't go down, so he took a beating and ended up in the hospital, and so he got out of the service as soon as the war ended. Actually, he was in San Diego, and I got my call, and I had my boot training in San Diego. The reason I had it there is I went in from San Antonio, Texas. If Dad could scrape up enough money, he would go south. So I went in from Texas, and so we were in the bases in San Diego together, the Marine base right alongside the Navy base. We go on Liberty. Funny, two guys in the same family from New Hampshire. At the time, we were from Hampstead, New Hampshire, and we go to the Bronx Zoo or go horseback riding or something until he was sent home at about that time. I was in San Diego about 3 months when I got my orders to go overseas, so they sent me over to Guam over on a Navy transport and back on an Army transport. The General Anderson, the APA Oneida, I went over to Guam on. I served 16 months there, and there were a lot of the Japanese giving up years later, which I was surprised. And we had, while I was there, a Japanese POWs working for me, a Marine. I got my license. I drove a truck, and a Marine guard alongside of me, and we had POWs policing the area till we sent them back to Japan. I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself. But anyways, and my 2 younger brothers, after I got out, and I went in January 16th, 46, and in for 2 years. And I got out, went back, I got a boot leave to Texas, and I said, I live in New Hampshire. So they changed that quick. And so that was kind of interesting. I've been writing poetry and drawings for 50 years now, and I have I have some. They're patriotic, inspirational, and drawings go with the. And so I like doing that and sharing good news and inspirational things. So I do that. I have an inspirational poem here. I don't know if you the time. It'd probably take about 3 minutes. If you want me to share it, I will.
Well, I think I'd like to go down the line and hear from the others now,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
thank you. If there's time, we'll come back.
I didn't know how much time I had, so
We'll come back.
okay. Yeah, thank you.
And Jerry Morensky, Conway Morensky.
It's a tough question how I feel about Veterans Day, because my dad wasn't a veteran. My dad was killed in action, therefore you're not a veteran. So growing up, we would have parades on Veterans Day and on Memorial Day. And Veterans Day always seemed to me, I would see soldiers. But I wouldn't see my dad. As I grow older, and have grown older and learned more about his service and the service of others, I started to appreciate those who came home. When you're small and you've lost a parent, you make them a hero.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, my father would have come home unflawed, undamaged, perfect. But maybe he wouldn't have. Maybe he would have come home wounded. Maybe he would have come home with what is now known as post-traumatic stress syndrome. So Veterans Day, I honor all those who served because I understand what the service meant. But to those of us who lost someone, we aren't a product of a veteran. We're a product of a dead soldier, which is a totally different category. Memorial Day means more to me, as far as a holiday goes. Veterans Day has always been a little more sad.
And it must have been very difficult when you were little and your mother.
Yeah, we always went to the parades, and I remember watching the cars of Gold Star mothers. They were called Gold Star mothers. Those are women who had lost a son to war. And I never thought anything about it. And when I grew up and was told by the Veterans Administration that I was a war orphan, it made me feel very uncomfortable, because the term orphan, the proper definition is the loss of a parent. But in my mind, my mother was still alive, therefore I wasn't an orphan. In the last few years, and it's only been within the last few years, children who lose fathers to war are starting to be referred to as Gold Star children.
Or mothers.
Or mothers, or any family member, but the Gold Star is attached rather than the word orphan to a child, and I think that will put a whole different spin on their growing up. You won't grow up with this tag of loss. You'll grow up with the tag of pride, which is a totally different way than we grew up, the products of World War II. Nothing to do with our parents, it was just the way things were in those days. And so I honor veterans. I love to hear World War II veterans speak, because they didn't talk in the 50s and 60s, did you? You didn't talk much.
Well, I wasn't one of those, but no, they did.
But most veterans that I would speak with, because you are always searching for information about your dad, where they served, and they would just say, oh, yeah, but it's over now, and move on. And so thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, we've been able to find a lot more about our dads and where they served. Up until then, it was very, very difficult, because we were being protected from bad news, I guess. So that's how I feel about Veterans Day.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and I know that we've talked about this in the past. Your dad is buried at Margraten in the Netherlands, and I wondered if we'll come back to you and talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, great.
All right. Roger.
Well, I guess I was kind of born to appreciate Veterans Day. My father's father passed away. He came home on leave from, he was in Germany, and got my mother pregnant with me, and then he left and went back, and I didn't see him for 2 years. So, and the way I got my name is because Roger was the term for saying yes back then, so that's why they named me Roger before he went back. And so I had a godfather that kind of took care of me for 2 years, and then when my father came, before my father came back, he got orders to go away, and he was killed in World War II. And one interesting aspect of that, not to take up too much time, but me and my wife went to France, and we did visit his grave in Epinal, 10,000 graves. And if you're not appreciative of the veterans or of the fellows that were killed, when you see those graves over there, it really changes your mind. They treat you like a king. They take you out to lunch. They put you, you know, in a nice car and take you out to your family's grave, and it's really quite a thing. But my father had made arrangements to meet my uncle at a little restaurant in Italy, and when he got there, my uncle wasn't there, and of course he had just been killed that morning. And so when we went there, we went to that little restaurant, and we called my father collect from that restaurant. It cost him $34, but he really appreciated that. So,
No Skype.
but I did have 4 uncles that were veterans that came back and alive. So that if you remember in Merrimac, we used to have the parades here, were 1 or 2 miles long, and were quite a thing. I am commander of the American Legion now. We had over 250 members at that time when I was a child, because the World War II guys, so it was really quite a activity back then. So then what happened to me is I saw the movie starring Jack Webb called The D.I. So that did it for me. I said, I got to be a drill instructor. So I had to join the Marine Corps. As soon as I got in, became what they call a Corporal E4. I put my name in. And we were in a big guns outfit. We were sitting out in the middle of the ocean. We had the actual interballistic continental missiles.
Wow.
We had the missiles on one ship and the nuclear war tips on another ship. Well, they started the draft during Vietnam, and so they needed drill instructors. So they brought a helicopter in, and I had my name in there. So they took 5 of us off the ship and brought us back to San Diego to be drill instructors. So over my life, I always, understood that these men, whether they were drafted or whether they volunteered, they went, they did their job, and some of them came back, and some of them didn't. But I always appreciate the men for what they did, and I just consider that an honor that I did it and that they did it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Robert.
Well, again, like my brother, I was always proud to know that my father had been in the Army, and he had traveled all over Europe. So I kept thinking, this is what I would like to do to represent him. So when I joined the Navy, I was able to get aboard a destroyer where I could go to all these different ports. And today you see these cruise ships where they're going here and there, and I think, but I've been there. Or when you sit and listen to the news and they're talking about a place, you're surprised to think, I was in that particular part. The thing that made me even more proud of being in the Navy is when my brother enlisted into the Marine Corps. This way, I thought our family had done it all. My father was in the Army, I'm in the Navy, and my brother is finishing in the Marine Corps. So the 3 of us, fortunately for us, we came back unscarred, physically. Mentally, we all had our different situations. It's not till you get involved in something that you realize how serious it's going to be. For me, the most serious part was the Cuban situation. Here we are aboard a little Navy destroyer, which has maybe 96 crew on it. Next thing you know, here comes a big transport, and the captain has been ordered to challenge this transport, and it won't listen to him. Next thing we know, we're shooting at the bow of that particular ship to stop that ship so some of the men can go aboard to check to see any arms that are coming and going into Cuba. The next thing that surprised me was to be at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, carrying a gun on the side of my waist like the 6 guns you see in the Westerns, thinking, this is part of the United States, is Guantanamo, Cuba. This is where so many people are. And here we are, Navy, patrolling it and making sure it's staying safe. So even though I got to see a lot of Europe, I can still say I'm proud of the fact that I joined the United States Navy. I feel more and more that I am an American citizen because I did my part like my father before me and my brother did his part. Whereas not just being born into this country makes you an American, but I contributed in my own tiny little way compared to other people. And that's why today I feel I'm very proud to stand up and say, yes, I am an American citizen.
Thank you. That was very eloquent. As I'm listening to the stories, I'm reminded by some of the things that were said when I was growing up, one of which was from my grandfather, who served in World War I. And he was in France. And he was actually attached to the Army Air Corps, which was brand new at the time. And they were sent there and were waiting and waiting for planes to arrive. And so they had a lot of free time while they were waiting. And he told me about the famine and how difficult it was for the people that actually lived in the country during the time of war, that sometimes get forgotten because it's, you know, many times political. But he would never, ever allow us to take food and not finish it because he remembered what it was like seeing little children scurrying through the garbage trying to find something to eat, and that stayed with him, and now it's with me. But you know, the other thing that I wanted to ask, you were serving during the Cold War, no, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, was that
Yes.
the time, 1968?
No,
Two.
62. I was really young at that time. Just born.
Yeah, this gray isn't fake, unfortunately.
So thank you for that. I think sometimes we forget about that. It was a very scary time. Perhaps some of us have seen it on television, in the movies, and things of that nature. Jerry?
I remember I was commuting home from college at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the subway I took, which went out to Wonderland, would emerge from under the ground just before the airport. And you could see the airport as you were riding by. And as we were riding by one night, there were all of the SAC planes lined up from the Strategic Air Command.
Ooh.
And I thought, oh my God, this is real. It was, I will never forget seeing that and the feeling that I had when we went by the airport, because, you know, to me it was off of Florida, and SAC planes were outside of Edwards Air Force Base and not in Massachusetts. And they were lined up on the runways, and I thought, oh my God, it's so real. It was a scary time.
Yeah. As I said, my father was serving in the Coast Guard, so we knew that there was trouble. And I was really too young to understand it completely, but when you saw all of the food being stored in the cellar, along with jugs of water, just in case, as I grew up in Westfield, Mass, which is very close to Westover, and it also has a National Guard air in Barnes Airport. So we always made the assumption that if there was going to be any conflict, that they would be attacking us personally. And of course, we all learned about getting under the desk. in
Yeah, I was
case
gonna
of-
bring that up. I can remember in the Donahue School here in Merrimack that we would get under the desk, or we would go out into the hall and get next to the lockers, you know.
Duck and cover.
And, yeah, duck and
Duck and
cover.
cover.
And I remember when I taught school at Pentucket, I would tell the kids about that, and they looked at me like I was crazy, you know, you gotta be kidding.
We had drills,
Oh, yes.
serious.
Yeah, oh yeah, we had very serious drills, yeah.
My air raid shelter in junior high school in Lynn was under the cement stairwell. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not sure I want to be here. But that's where we had,
Yeah.
and sirens, remember
Yeah.
air raid sirens?
Yes.
blowing?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
Scary times, Cold War.
One of the things that I also, looking back and remembering, my grandmother was an ambulance driver for the Red Cross during World War II. And she had a special license, and she was able to get gasoline because everything was, rationed. And but they were allowed to have gasoline because if there was ever a problem, she had to be able to get to the ambulance. Now, I've seen my grandmother drive. I don't know that anybody would have gotten there safely. But yeah, that was really something. What was it like during World War II living here as children growing up? What was that like?
Well, I can remember you went to the movies and you get in with a little bit less money if you brought in a bunch of toothpaste tubes that were leveled out and no more toothpaste in it.
Why toothpaste?
They did something with the containers. I have no idea what.
Was it metal?
There was probably some
Yeah,
aluminum
they
in
melted it down.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories about World War II is, and you mentioned it when you used the term blackout, we had a little black Cocker Spaniel, and he was all black. So we named him Blackout. And of course, when the civil defense people, I was 2 streets over from the Henschel Corporation. Henschel Corporation used to make parts for submarines, telegraphs, full speed ahead, stop, and so forth. And so there was one of the plants where there would be civil defense workers in a drill or a blackout. And the gentleman on the street next to us was a policeman, and he was off duty, but he was also a civil defense worker. And my mother one night went out to call in my dog, and she just yelled blackout.
Oh, no.
And the gentleman got his hat and his flashlight and went over to Henschel's to stand at his post. That was one of my experiences during World War II.
It was a little
Richard.
tensious time for us in a way, because where Dad fought in the First War, and what he's always thinking, well, we're fighting so there wouldn't be more wars, so the Germans wouldn't start again, and then the Second War
the
come
Great
up.
War.
And then he was wondering, and we were all of age, and my 2 older brothers were already in the service during the war, and I went in when it was, just during the duration of the war. It was only a few months afterwards. So Dad was pretty worried and concerned about us going in, and and he'd been through a lot of bad experiences and wounded, because he was not only, he was in the Army and also in the Marines. He was in the Yankee Division when he was in the first. So it was kind of tensious, because we had a lot of the old records during the First War. Dad would play them and making fun of some of the Germans. I remember some of them. One record went like this: "Is this Nazi land so good? Would you leave it if you could?" "Yeah, this Nazi land is good, and we would leave it if we could." Funny records like that. So, but we made a little bit fun of it. But it was a serious time, and we had the blackouts and things like that, and so forth. And we were wondering, tensious time a little bit, but we didn't worry too much. We didn't. But
Jerry,
that's the
were
way it
you
was.
old enough to remember very
No,
much?
I
Yeah.
was 3. I was born in 42, so I don't have too many memories. I remember my dad being home once. It must have been Christmas of '44. And I do remember I got stories from the family. One of them, my mother's, all of her brothers were in the service. And one of them, my Uncle Joe, who recently passed away at the age of 95, God love him, had seen action all through the Pacific. And during the war, he would write letters home, of course. And to my grandparents, his parents, you know, when he went to Fort Devens, that was so far away. And then, oh my God, California. And then they didn't know where he was. So he began writing letters home to everybody, all of his sisters. And at first, they thought something was really wrong with him because he had the wrong middle initial. My mother's middle initial was E, and he would have her middle initial as K. And this went on, and finally one of the sisters said, wait a minute, we need to look about this. So they put all the letters on the table and began to unscramble the middle initials, and he was telling them where he was. So my grandfather, I remember this map in the kitchen. There was a map, and he had marks where Joe had gone, because Attu, Kiska, Kwajalein, they were all written in the middle initial.
Wow.
Letters, my mother said, they never knew he could write so many letters. And he never talked about it. I talked about it with him about 5 or 6 years ago. I said, I know a secret about you and how you told everybody at home where you were. And he just put his head down. He said, your mother told you that. And I said, yes. He said, it was supposed to be a secret. So, but that was kind of a cute.
Yeah.
I'm sure he wasn't the only one that did it that way, but the guys that were overseas, when they wrote home, they couldn't tell you where they were because it would be censored because of troop movements. But he managed to get away with it, so his parents knew exactly where he was.
Yeah.
So, but as far as day-to-day things, no, I don't remember much other than something about rubber. I
They
do
would
have
collect.
a memory about rubber. About
Tires.
They save
have
tires
big-
and things.
Tires, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They would metal.
Yeah.
They'd have collections, and rubber tires would be the big thing.
Right.
And
Rationing was a big thing, too.
Rationing.
Yeah.
You could only get meat certain times, and that's when my grandmother tried to serve my family tongue, and that didn't go over too well. I heard that story.
And horse meat.
Horse meat, yes. Foods that people weren't accustomed to eating became a staple. And of course,
Spam.
everyone had spam,
Spam.
yes, and victory gardens.
Right.
Victory gardens were a way to bring produce into the home, and so that was another thing. And the shades, I can still remember the very dark shades. They would be black.
Blackout shades.
Blackout shades.
Yeah.
And the headlights would be painted.
Top half.
The top half would be painted, and street lights were
There was the black market back then,
Yeah.
too.
black market. Ooh, Roger.
Yeah, I was kind of too young too, because I was 2 and 3 before it got over. But one of the things I do remember is going into my grandmother's house, and she had one of those old-fashioned coat trees where you hung your coat on the tree before you went in, and then there was a bench where you sat on the bench to take your boots off and stuff. Well, on that bench there was a pair of bronze boots, and that was my uncle's boots. And the story is that when, first of all, and we had at least 5 or 7 killed from during World War II in Merrimac, and it was the old green Kaisers that used to drive up to the house, and 2 of the military men would get out, and of course as soon as she saw that, she knew there was a problem. But first of all, he was missing in action, and they brought the telegram to her from the the Secretary of the Army. And then a week later, they came again, and and she knew that that was the end, that they brought her the telegram saying that he had been, he had been found. Well, she had the choice of either bringing him home or letting him be buried, and so did the other fellows in town, letting him be buried with his men at the cemetery. Well, she chose to let him be buried, but what they did is they did send the boots home to the family, and they were bronzed.
Wow.
And so she had that, and I don't know who has them now. She had a big, she had 13 brothers and sisters, so one of them has it. And so that I can always remember that, and I was, that's why as soon as I had the able to go to see his grave. And the other thing is that we still have all the stamps where you were giving our rations.
Right.
The food was rationed, of course.
Right.
Each family had stamps. If you had children, you had more stamps than the family without children. And the same thing with medical care. We had Dr. Sweetser in town, and the medical care was given free to the families that had a family member serving. But that didn't mean that you got immediate medical care. You kind of waited in line and things like that. But the medical care was given to the families with children first, and those are the two things that I can remember.
Very important
Yeah.
things to remember.
Yeah.
And that leads me back to Jerry, actually. Would you share with us some of the things that you brought?
Sure. Couple of things. One of these is something that I recently got. This is not the original. But during the war, anyone that had someone in the service could hang one of these in their doorway or in a window. And if they're in the service, the star was blue. When someone was killed, they put up a gold star. And that's where the name Gold Star families come from. It's still done, not quite as much as it was during World War I and World War II and Korea. But that's just for the education of people. The other thing that Laura had asked me about, and only because I know she has a soft spot for this place, is where my father is buried. And Roger was just alluding to Epinal in France, which is another one of the cemeteries that is under the auspices of the American Battles Memorial Commission, who are the overseers of all of the overseas World War I and World War II cemeteries. At the end of World War II, people were given a choice, like my mother was given the choice of leaving my father in Europe or to bring his body home. I questioned her about that when I was about 16 years old because I wondered why she hadn't brought him home. And she then told me, because she thought I was old enough to know, that it took anywhere from 3 to 5 years to get the bodies back home again. And because we didn't have jet planes and all of the ships were being used to bring home the living, rightly so. So she had elected to leave him there because she did not want to try to explain to a child who she told that her dad was in heaven, okay, now there's a box and a flag, and we're having a ceremony. Didn't make any sense to her. And until I got to Holland and saw the cemetery, I really wasn't sure that she had done the right thing. But once I stepped foot in that cemetery, just like I'm sure you felt the same way, Roger, they are magnificently beautiful, well cared for. And what I brought with me, I don't know if this is good enough for you to catch. This is an overview of the Netherlands American Cemetery at Margraat in Holland, which is a very small town. And this is the overview of it. Epinal has 10,000 buried. Margraat has 8,301 and 1,100 names on the walls of the missing. What they do in a lot of these cemeteries, in Holland in specific, is all of the graves are adopted by Dutch families, and they've been doing that since 1945. I'm very close to the Dutch family that adopted my father's grave. We exchanged Christmas gifts, we exchanged houses back and forth. Our children know each other, so it's become a very nice family because of a death, which is kind of a nice thing. In France, they also do the same type of thing a little bit differently. I just saw something yesterday on the American Battles website about Henri Chappelle's adoption program. Henri Chappelle is one of the American cemeteries in Belgium. There are 2 there from World War II. So those who travel to Europe and can take a day to go to one of these cemeteries, most people will go to Normandy, and that's very iconic. It's perfect for someone who has never seen a cemetery before, a military cemetery. But the others are just as beautiful, a little bit different, and you are treated like a king or queen if you go to visit a grave. It's unbelievable. They will bring a person to the grave. They did this with me on my first visit in 1985, and they paint the grave with sand so that when you take a photograph, the name stands out. And it wasn't until 15 years later that I learned that all of the sand used at all of the cemeteries around the world, the American military cemeteries, comes from Normandy. So it's very symbolic when they use that sand. So I encourage people to go there. Once I made the first step to go to see Dad's grave, it wasn't a closure. I don't know how you felt, Roger. It's not a closure, but it was an opening to another path. When I saw the care that's given and the love that's given and the memories that happen, it really is a healing thing. So my mom did the right thing, and I think your grandmother did the right thing too.
One of the, just to expand on that, one of the reasons they have to use the sand, and I don't know if you can see it, but they're all solid white crosses. Now their names are on each cross, but you can't really read the name. You can read the name if you get up close, but a picture would not show the name. So they have to cover the name with black sand or dark sand, so that when you take the picture, the actual name will stand out.
It's amazing. It's really wonderful. So I encourage anybody that's watching this to go on to your internet to www.abmc.gov and take a look at the website for these cemeteries. They now have a live cam at Normandy daily. So if you go on at 7 in the morning, you are seeing Normandy at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, same day. And you get to see people walking and putting flowers in, and it's quite something. Hopefully they'll have them at all
I
the
believe
cemeteries.
they have one at Pearl Harbor also.
No, not
No?
yet.
Not yet. Okay.
That is a national cemetery, so it's a little bit different. But one of the things that I believe the director, the fairly new director of the ABMC, Max Cleland, is doing is having short videos made of each one of these cemeteries. And it's interesting because there's a lot of history in that little minute-and-a-half video. It tells you a lot about what it means and, you know, why the cemetery is where it is, what battle took place in the area. Where my dad is buried, it wasn't started until December of '44 because of the Battle of the Bulge, the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest. They needed a place to put people because the other cemeteries were filling up. So the U.S. Army went to this little town in Holland and said, we need land, and farmers gave up their farms free of charge, and there it is. So it started with, I believe originally there were over 20,000 buried there. And over time, they came home, so there's 8,000 that are left.
Some of the cemeteries in this country, Arlington National Cemetery is an amazing trip. That's truly a moving experience. But there's also in Bourne and here in Massachusetts,
Correct.
there's a military cemetery. There's quite a few of them around actually, but they're pretty impressive. Naturally, it's not the same as being in Europe where people were killed because they were there in the invasion, but it's quite a moving experience. And if you see the changing of the guard, or you're actually fortunate enough to experience see a funeral in Washington.
Actually, I did that 3 weeks ago.
You did that recently,
Yeah, I did it over the Friday of Labor Day weekend. A friend of mine's husband had passed, and he had been career Navy, and they had the inurnment, that's a new word I learned, at Arlington. So I went down for it, and it is unbelievable. It's so impressive. 98 degrees, 98% humidity, and not one of those sailors in white flinched. It was amazing.
From a different point of view, I've been to Pearl Harbor and Arlington National Cemetery. When I was in the Army, I had a chance to go to Berlin. This was before the wall went up. And we were allowed into the Russian sector. And I visited a Russian cemetery. And they had no choice. All of their dead were buried in the battle for Berlin, were buried in this cemetery. It was called the Garden of Remembrance. And there were mass graves. The headstones were bigger than the walls in this house. And it was quite an experience. And so they didn't bring their dead home. They left them there.